She didn't come back for him. She came for a signature. 8 months ago, she walked out of the most dangerous syndicate in Boston with nothing but the clothes on her back. Today, she's standing in the marble foyer of a ruthless boss holding divorce papers and a secret impossible to hide. When he looks up from his desk, he doesn't just see the wife who walked away. He sees the 8-month swell of his unborn child, and all hell breaks loose. The cab driver didn't want to take her up the hill. Everyone in the city knew who lived at the end of Ironwood Drive. They knew about the high stone walls, the cameras tucked into the weeping willows, and the men in tailored suits who carried themselves with a quiet, lethal kind of weight. Evelyn paid the fare with a crisp 20, told the driver to keep the change, and stepped out into the freezing November rain. She didn't run for cover. She couldn't run if she tried. Her hand rested instinctively on the massive swell of her stomach, steadying the low, heavy ache in her pelvis. 8 months. 34 weeks. The baby was sitting low today, pressing against her spine with every step she took on the wet gravel. She pulled her wool coat tighter, though it hadn't buttoned over her waist in 2 months. Underneath, she wore a simple black maternity dress. No jewelry, no makeup. The diamond ring that had once weighed down her left hand was sitting in a pawn shop in Chicago, paying for the cramped apartment she'd hidden in for the better part of a year. At the wrought iron gates, a guard stepped out of the security booth. He was a new face, young, broad-shouldered hand resting casually near the lapel of his jacket. "Private property, ma'am," he said. Then his eyes dropped to her stomach. His posture softened a fraction, the ingrained human instinct to protect a pregnant woman overriding his training for a split second. "You lost?" "No," Evelyn said. Her voice was flat, deadened by fatigue. She pulled a thick manila envelope from her tote bag to shield it from the drizzle. "I'm here to see Damien." The guard frowned, his hand dropping away from his jacket. "Mr. Reed isn't expecting company. I'm going to have to ask you to turn around." "Tell him Evelyn is at the gate." The guard froze. He wasn't that new then. He knew the name. Everyone in the Reed syndicate knew the name of the boss's wife, the woman who had vanished like smoke in the middle of a gang war, leaving Damien Reed tearing the city apart, down to the studs looking for her. For the first month, they thought she was kidnapped. By month 3, they realized she had run. The guard pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. He turned away, whispering frantically into his mic. Evelyn just stood in the rain. She felt a sharp kick just below her ribs, a tiny heel jabbing into her organs. "Hush," she thought, resting her thumb against the tight fabric of her dress. Just a few more minutes. We get the signature, and we leave. The gate clicked and swung open with a heavy metallic groan. "Front door," the guard muttered, refusing to meet her eyes now. He looked terrified. Evelyn walked up the long driveway. The house loomed ahead, a sprawling stone estate that looked more like a fortress than a home. She used to plant hydrangeas out front. They were dead now, brown and withered in the frost. Tommy stood on the front porch. He was Damien's right hand, a man who had killed people with the same casual indifference most men use to order a coffee. As Evelyn approached the steps, Tommy's face underwent a catastrophic shift. The stoic, unreadable mask fractured. His jaw dropped. His eyes locked onto her stomach, wide and entirely unblinking. "Evelyn," Tommy breathed. It wasn't a greeting. It was an exhalation of shock. "Hello, Tommy," she said. She grabbed the brass handrail and hauled herself up the stone steps. Her lower back screamed. "Is he in his office?" "Evelyn, what?" Tommy stammered, physically blocking the double oak doors. He looked at her face, pale and drawn, then back down to the undeniable basketball-sized curve of her belly. "What is this?" "This is the end of the paperwork," Evelyn said. tapping the wet manila envelope against her thigh. "Move, Tommy. I'm cold, and I need to pee." Tommy stepped aside like he had been slapped. He opened the heavy door for her. The heat of the foyer washed over her, smelling of beeswax old wood and the faint, sharp tang of expensive cigar smoke. The smell hit Evelyn's heightened senses, and her stomach immediately rolled. She swallowed back the bile. "He's in the study," Tommy said, his voice dropping to a low, panicked whisper. "Evelyn, he doesn't know. He thinks you're just here to sign the papers," she finished. "I know. That's all I'm here to do." She didn't wait for an escort. She knew the way. Down the hall past the antique mirrors and the Persian rugs that muted her footsteps. The house was dead quiet. It always was during the day. The real work of the syndicate happened in the dark in the shipping yards and the back rooms of the Diamond District. Here it was just ledgers and lawyers. She reached the heavy mahogany doors of the study. She didn't knock. She reached out, turned the brass handle and pushed. Damian Reed was losing his patience. He sat behind his father's antique desk, staring at the divorce settlement his lawyer had placed in front of him 20 minutes ago. His head pounded. The Irish crews on the south side were trying to muscle in on the pharmaceutical shipments. His customs agents were demanding a higher cut, and now he had to deal with this. She waived alimony, Cohen, his lawyer, said from the leather chair opposite the desk. Cohen was a nervous man who sweated through his expensive suits. She waived claim to the properties, the offshore accounts, everything. She just wants the dissolution of the marriage. Damian stared at Evelyn's messy signature on the bottom of the first page. The ink was blue. He hated blue ink. 8 months. Damian said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "She disappears for 8 months, makes me look like a fool in front of the commission, and now she just wants out. No money, no explanation." "It's a clean break, Mr. Reed. Legally speaking, it's the best possible outcome." Damian's eyes snapped up. They were dark, cold, and entirely hollow. "Do I look like I give a shit about legally speaking, Cohen?" Cohen swallowed hard and shut his mouth. Damian looked back at the paper. His chest felt tight, a persistent pressure that hadn't left since the morning he woke up to an empty bed and a missing suitcase. He had burned half of Boston to the ground, looking for her. He had broken bones, shattered alliances, tortured men who swore they knew nothing. And then a week ago, this envelope showed up in his mail. "Sign it, Damian. Please, just a sticky note attached to the front." No return address. He picked up his pen. A heavy, gold-plated Mont Blanc. He uncapped it. He was going to sign it. He was going to sever the tie, find out where the lawyer had served her, and then he was going to go there and demand answers. Not as her husband, as the man who owned this city. The brass handle of the office door clicked. "I said no interruptions," Damian barked without looking up. He pressed the nib of the pen to the paper. "I don't care what you said." The voice hit him like a physical blow. Damian's hand froze. The pen hovered a millimeter above the dotted line. A drop of ink gathered at the tip fell and bled into the thick paper. He knew that voice. He heard it in his sleep. He heard it every time the floorboards creaked in the empty bedroom upstairs. He looked up. Evelyn stood in the doorway. Her dark hair was damp, plastered to her cheeks from the rain. There were dark circles under her eyes. She looked exhausted. She looked pale. And then Damian's gaze dropped. The pen slipped from his fingers. It hit the desk with a sharp clatter, rolling off the edge and staining the Persian rug. Cohen turned around in his chair to see who had entered. The lawyer opened his mouth to reprimand the intruder, took one look at Evelyn, and choked on his own breath. Damian couldn't breathe. The air in the room was suddenly gone, vacuumed out by the sheer impossible reality standing in his doorway. She was pregnant. Heavily, undeniably pregnant. The black fabric of her dress clung to a stomach so large she had to lean back slightly on her heels to balance the weight. Damien's brain short-circuited. His eyes darted from her face, down to the massive swell and back up to her face. He tried to do the math. His mind scrambled, desperate and chaotic. 8 months she'd been gone. 8 months. The silence in the room was deafening. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the rain lashing against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Damien stood up. He didn't realize he was doing it. The heavy leather chair scraped backward, the sound violent in the quiet room. "Cohen," Damien said. His voice didn't sound like his own. It was a terrifying, deadened calm. "Get out." The lawyer scrambled to his feet, grabbing his briefcase. He didn't say a word. He edged around Evelyn, keeping his back to the wall, and practically bolted down the hallway. Evelyn stepped fully into the room and pushed the heavy mahogany doors shut behind her. They locked with a decisive click. Damien rounded the desk. His eyes were wide dilated, entirely fixed on her stomach. His hands were shaking. Damien Reed, a man who had stared down the barrels of guns without blinking, a man who had severed fingers to make a point, was trembling. "Evelyn," he breathed, stopping 3 feet away from her. The proximity hit him hard. She smelled like cheap vanilla soap and rain. Not the expensive French perfume he used to buy her. "I brought my copies," she said, her voice remarkably steady. She pulled the folded papers from the wet manila envelope. "I signed where your lawyer indicated. I need your signature on page 4 and 7. Then I'll go." Damien didn't look at the papers. He didn't even register she was holding them. "Whose is it?" he asked. The question tore out of his throat, raw and bleeding. Evelyn blinked, a flash of genuine irritation cutting through her exhaustion. "Are you stupid, Damien, or just bad at math?" He flinched. The confirmation hit him straight in the chest. "Mine." The word echoed in his skull. His child, his flesh and blood, was sitting right there beneath the damp black fabric of her dress. "You left me." He whispered, the betrayal suddenly fresh, razor-sharp, and completely devastating. "You packed a bag, you walked out the front door, and you took my child with you." "I took my child," Evelyn corrected, her chin tilting up. "And yes, I left. Now sign the papers, Damien. The cab is waiting at the bottom of the hill." Damien stared at her. A dark, terrifying possessiveness began to uncoil in his gut, replacing the shock. It was hot, primal, and entirely ruthless. He took a slow step forward, closing the distance between them. "There is no cab," he said softly. "Damien, there are no papers." He continued, his voice dropping an octave, becoming the dangerous, commanding tone that kept the Boston underworld in line. He snatched the damp envelope out of her hand. He didn't look at it. He tore the thick stack of papers in half, the sound of ripping paper violent in the quiet room. He threw the pieces onto the floor. Evelyn's eyes widened. "What are you doing? I need those—" "You need to sit down before you fall down," he said. He closed the last foot between them. He didn't ask for permission. He reached out his large, calloused hands, bypassing her waist, bypassing her shoulders. He placed both hands directly on either side of her swollen belly. Evelyn gasped instinctively, grabbing his wrists to push him away, but his grip was unyielding. Beneath his left palm, a sudden, sharp pressure rippled outward. A kick. Damien's breath hitched. His eyes snapped up to hers, wide and entirely unmasked. He felt it. Life. Real, kinetic, undeniable life moving inside of her. His. "Did you really think," Damien whispered, his thumbs pressing gently into the fabric of her dress, feeling the solid weight of the baby, "that you could walk into my house, show me this, and I would just let you walk back out. Let go of me, Evelyn demanded, her nails digging into the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He didn't move. He kept his hands bracketed around her stomach, his gaze locked on hers. He was too close. He was a tall man, broad and imposing, and right now his entire physical presence was geared toward trapping her in his gravity. "Why?" Damien asked. It wasn't a request, it was an interrogation. "Why did you run?" "You know why. I clearly don't," he snapped, his voice finally cracking like a whip. "I spent 8 months thinking you got tired of me, thinking the life was too much for you. I tore the city apart, Evelyn. I put men in the ground looking for you. And you were hiding this. I was protecting this!" she yelled back, shoving hard against his chest. He didn't budge, but he loosened his grip on her stomach, letting his hands slide to her hips to steady her. She was breathing heavily, a flush of color finally hitting her pale cheeks. "Protecting it from what?" Damien demanded, his eyes flashing with a dangerous, insulted rage. "From me. You think I would hurt my own blood?" "No, I think your enemies would," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. The exhaustion she had carried for 8 months finally cracked open. "Think about it, Damien. The week I left, what happened?" He frowned, his mind rifling through the chaos of his life. "The O'Connor Syndicate made a move on the docks, and they blew up your warehouse," Evelyn said, her chest heaving. "The warehouse you were supposed to be in. You came home with blood on your hands and glass in your hair. You sat on the edge of the bed, and you told me it was going to get worse before it got better." Damien's jaw tightened until a muscle ticked beneath his ear. He remembered that night. He had been untouchable in his own mind, but the war had been bloody. "I found out I was pregnant 2 days before that," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "I was going to tell you. I bought a stupid little pair of shoes. I had them in a box on the dresser." She let out a bitter, wet laugh. "And then I watched you pull a shard of shrapnel out of your own shoulder in our bathroom sink. You told me to pack a bag and stay at the safe house because the O'Connors were looking to hit you where it hurt." She looked down at her stomach, then back up to his eyes. "If they knew I was carrying your heir, a baby, I wouldn't be collateral, Damien. I would be the primary target. We would have spent the next 18 years looking over our shoulders, surrounded by bodyguards waiting for a car bomb. I refused to raise a child in a war zone." Damien stared at her, absorbing the absolute, terrifying logic of her fear. She hadn't run because she didn't love him. She ran because she realized the world he built was a graveyard waiting to happen. "So you took my child to Chicago," he stated, his voice flat. He had traced the pawn shop ticket. He knew she had been there. "You lived in a slum, eating canned soup, hiding from me to keep the baby safe." "Yes." "And what was the plan today?" He gestured to the torn papers on the rug. "You walk in here heavily pregnant to get a piece of paper signed, and then what? You go back to Chicago. You thought I wouldn't look at you. You thought you could just wear a big coat and waddle out of here without me noticing." Evelyn looked away, a flash of genuine embarrassment crossing her face. I ran out of money. The lawyer said I had to present the papers in person to expedite the dissolution. If I didn't get it done this week, the court date would drag on past my due date. I couldn't risk it. I just wanted it over with. "You came because you had no money." Damien's voice was lethal. Not at her, but at the situation. "My wife is living in poverty carrying my child, and she comes to me for a divorce instead of a check. I'm not your wife anymore, Damien. Not in any way that matters. That piece of paper on the floor says otherwise." He reached out his hand, cupping the side of her face. His thumb brushed over her cheekbone. She tried to pull back, but he stepped into her space, his chest brushing against the swell of her belly. You think a judge and a signature severs this. You think I'm going to let you walk out of that door, get into a cab and go give birth to my child in a clinic with off-brand equipment. Damien, stop. No, you stop, he said, his voice dropping to a ragged whisper. He pressed his forehead against hers. He was a man dying of thirst who had just been thrown into an ocean. The relief of having her back was battling violently with the rage of her leaving. You did what you had to do to survive. I get it. I hate it, and I will never forgive you for taking these 8 months from me. But I get it. He slid his hand to the back of her neck, his fingers curling into her damp hair, anchoring her to him. But you are done running, Evelyn. You are done hiding in shitty apartments. The O'Connors are dead. I buried them 6 months ago. The city is quiet. It belongs to me. He tilted her head up, forcing her to look into his dark, obsessive eyes. And you belong to me. Both of you. You can't just keep me here, she argued, but her voice lacked conviction. She was tired. Her back hurt. The smell of his cologne, cedar, and scotch was disorienting, wrapping around her like a heavy, familiar blanket. Watch me, Damien whispered. He didn't give her a chance to argue. He turned his head and shouted toward the heavy doors. Tommy! The doors banged open instantly. Tommy had clearly been standing right on the other side, listening. Boss, Tommy said, keeping his eyes firmly on Damien, entirely avoiding looking at Evelyn. Cancel my afternoon, Damien ordered, not taking his hands off Evelyn. Have Mrs. Gable open up the master suite. Tell her to get the heat on, and find some clean clothes. Then get Dr. Aris on the phone. Tell him to get his ass to the estate in 20 minutes with an ultrasound machine, or I'll shoot him in his driving hand. Tommy nodded once. Done. He vanished, pulling the doors shut behind him. Evelyn stared at Damien, panic rising in her chest. Damien, I am not staying here. I didn't pack a bag. I have a life. You have a lease you can't afford, and a pawn ticket for a wedding ring I bought you. Damien cut her off ruthlessly. He looked down at her stomach again. The anger in his face fractured, replaced by something terribly soft and fiercely guarded. He placed his hand flat against her belly again, waiting. A few seconds later, the baby kicked back against his palm. A ghost of a smile, small and devastating, touched the corner of the Mafia Boss's mouth. You're home, Evelyn, he said softly, his thumb stroking the tight fabric over his child. You are never signing those papers, and you are never leaving my sight again. The master suite smelled exactly the same. Bergamot clean linen and the faint, metallic, underlying scent of the city rain that always managed to cling to the heavy velvet curtains. Evelyn sat on the edge of the king-sized mattress. She was draped in a massive charcoal-grey cotton robe that Mrs. Gable, the estate's housekeeper, had practically swaddled her in after a forced, lukewarm shower. The older woman hadn't asked a single question. She had just drawn the water-handed Evelyn a bar of unscented soap and left a plate of sliced fruit and heavily buttered toast on the vanity. Evelyn had eaten the toast in 3 bites. She was starving. She was always starving lately, but the chronic, low-level anxiety of rationing her dwindling grocery budget in Chicago had conditioned her to ignore it. Here the food tasted like an immediate, dangerous concession to the life she had fled. Damien stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his back to the room. He had taken off his suit jacket, leaving him in a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He hadn't said a word in 20 minutes. He was just staring out at the rain-slicked driveway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders rigid. The heavy oak door clicked open. Tommy stepped in, followed closely by a breathless, middle-aged man carrying a bulky black medical case. Dr. Orris. He was the syndicate's private physician, a man who usually spent his nights digging bullets out of shoulders in basement clinics not conducting prenatal exams. "I got here as fast as I could," Dr. Orris said, setting the case down on the plush rug. He looked at Evelyn, his eyes darting to her enormous belly, and then snapped his gaze to Damien's back. "Mr. Reed, I brought the portable unit." Damien turned around. The blank, unreadable mask was back in place, but his eyes were entirely feral. "Set it up. Check her. Check everything." Evelyn lay back against the pillows, her spine aching as she shifted her weight. She didn't have the energy to fight the exam. She hadn't seen a doctor in 2 months. The free clinic in Chicago had a wait list, and she hadn't wanted to risk giving her real name anyway. A deep, primal part of her needed to know the baby was okay. Dr. Aris moved with nervous efficiency. He plugged the machine into the wall, flipped open the screen, and handed Evelyn a towel to tuck into the waistband of her robe. "This will be cold, Mrs. Reed," he murmured, applying a thick streak of blue gel directly to her stomach. Evelyn flinched at the chill. She hated the title. Mrs. Reed. It sounded like a trap snapping shut. Aris pressed the plastic transducer against her skin. He dragged it slowly across the curve of her belly. The black and white screen flickered a snowstorm of pixels that suddenly solidified into a curved spine, a tiny rib cage, and the distinct shadowy profile of a face. Damien crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't stop at the foot of the bed. He walked right up to Evelyn's side, crowding the doctor, his eyes glued to the small monitor. Aris hit a button on the console. Suddenly, the quiet room was filled with a sound. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Fast, rhythmic, strong, like a galloping horse echoing in a tunnel. The baby's heartbeat. Damien stopped breathing. The color drained completely from his face. His hands, which had been clenched into fists at his sides, slowly opened. He stared at the screen, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic bursts. He looked like a man who had just been shot and didn't know how to fall down. "Heart rate is 145 beats per minute," Dr. Aris said, his voice forcibly calm. "Strong, very strong. Amniotic fluid levels look adequate. Measurements indicate roughly 34 weeks." The doctor shifted the wand. "Looks like a healthy weight. The mother is slightly malnourished, blood pressure is a bit low, but the fetus is thriving. It's taking what it needs." Damien slowly lowered himself, dropping to one knee right beside the bed. His face was inches from Evelyn's hip. He didn't look at her. He just watched the screen, watching the tiny flutter of the heart valves working in the dark. He reached out his hand, shaking, and placed 2 fingers lightly against the skin of Evelyn's stomach, right next to the ultrasound wand. "A boy or a girl?" Damien asked. His voice was cracked raw, stripped of every ounce of authority he commanded on the streets. "I don't know," Evelyn answered before the doctor could speak. She looked at the ceiling, fighting the sudden burning sting of tears in her eyes. "I told the nurses in Chicago not to tell me. I wanted it to be a surprise." She hadn't wanted a surprise. She just hadn't wanted to picture the child too clearly terrified that the world would somehow snatch it away if she grew too attached to a name. Damien's jaw tightened. "Leave it," he told Aris. "Don't tell us." Aris nodded, wiping the gel off Evelyn's stomach with a soft cloth. "I'll prescribe prenatal vitamins, high iron. She needs rest, Mr. Reed. Complete bed rest for at least a week to bring her blood pressure up. No stress." "Understood," Damien said. He didn't stand up. He waited until Aris packed up the machine and Tommy escorted the doctor out of the room. The door clicked shut. They were alone again. Damien finally turned his head to look at her. His dark eyes were glossy, swimming with an emotion so intense it made Evelyn want to look away. He didn't yell. He didn't demand. He just rested his cheek against the mattress near her hip, his large hand still resting possessively on her covered stomach. "I'm going to kill everyone who ever made you feel like you had to run from me," he whispered into the blankets. "I'm going to pave this city in concrete to keep you safe. You are never, ever sleeping in a cold room again." Evelyn closed her eyes, a tear finally slipping down her temple into her hair. She was trapped. The cage was gilded bulletproof and guarded by a monster who loved her entirely too much. And God help her, as the sheer, bone-deep exhaustion pulled her under, she let herself sink into the safety of it. It was 2 a.m. when the hunger woke her again. Evelyn blinked at the dark ceiling. The bed was empty. Damien's side of the mattress was cold. The baby was entirely awake, executing a series of sharp, rhythmic kicks against her bladder that made sleep physically impossible. She rolled onto her side, groaning softly as her pelvic bones ground together. She pushed herself up, tightening the belt of the oversized robe. The estate was silent, save for the faint, steady drumming of the rain against the glass. She needed milk. She needed something solid. Evelyn padded barefoot out of the master suite and down the carpeted hallway. The grand staircase was dimly lit by a single chandelier. As she descended, the sprawling, cavernous ground floor came into view. She saw the soft glow of a lamp spilling out from the formal dining room, followed by the low, gravelly hum of men's voices. She paused on the bottom step, instinctively pulling back into the shadows. Old habits died hard. In the syndicate, late-night meetings meant blood on the ledger. "The perimeter is tight, boss," Tommy was saying. His voice was clipped, strictly business. "I pulled the boys from the south port. We have 12 men on the grounds, 6 rotating at the gate, and 2 on the roof. No one gets within a mile of the property without us knowing." "Not good enough," Damien's voice replied. It was entirely different from the broken whispering tone he had used in the bedroom. This was the boss. The apex predator. "I want the cameras upgraded by tomorrow. I want the security detail doubled. Call the Russians and tell them the weapons shipment is delayed. I'm not moving product this week. The city is locked down." "Damien," a new voice spoke. Evelyn recognized it. Carmine, a brutal, seasoned capo who ran the extortion rackets. "With respect, you shut down the docks, the families in New York are going to start asking questions. They know the O'Connors are dead. They think we're weak right now because we're restructuring. If you pull all the muscle back to the house, it sends a signal." "I don't give a fuck about New York," Damien snarled. There was the sound of a glass shattering against a brick fireplace. Someone flinched. Evelyn held her breath. "My wife is upstairs. She is carrying my heir. If a single word of this leaks to the streets, if anyone even breathes a rumor that she is back in this city, I will start taking heads, starting with the men in this room. Am I clear? Crystal Boss," Carmine said quickly, the bravado entirely gone from his voice. "Find out who helped her disappear." Damien continued, his tone lethal and methodical. "Someone gave her fake IDs. Someone set up the cash drops so she wouldn't leave a paper trail. I want a name. And when you find him, you bring him to me. Nobody touches my family and lives to spend the money." Evelyn felt a cold spike of dread hit her stomach. The guy in Chicago who forged her papers was just a scared kid working out of a basement. She stepped out of the shadows, her bare feet padding softly on the hardwood floor. She walked straight into the dining room. The air in the room instantly froze. Tommy reached for his holster, purely on reflex, before recognizing her. Carmine stiffened, staring at her massive stomach, as if she had just walked in wearing a bomb vest. Damien was standing at the head of the long mahogany table maps and ledgers scattered across the wood. His tie was loose, his hair messy from running his hands through it. When he saw her, the murderous tension in his shoulders vanished. "Evelyn." he said, his voice dropping instantly to a gentle register that made Carmine's jaw practically hit the floor. Damien walked around the table, ignoring his lieutenants completely. "What are you doing out of bed? Aris said you need to stay off your feet." "I'm hungry," she said bluntly, crossing her arms over her chest. She looked past him, locking eyes with Carmine. "And tell your dogs to stand down, Damien. Nobody helped me. I found a guy on a street corner in the Loop and paid him $300 in cash. I don't know his name, and he didn't know mine." "Leave it alone." Damien reached her, his hands immediately coming up to cup her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, checking her temperature. "You shouldn't be walking the stairs in the dark." "I wanted milk. I would have brought it to you." "You were busy planning a war," she retorted, leaning back slightly to escape his grip, though he just followed her movement, stepping closer. Tommy cleared his throat, staring fixedly at the wall. "We'll wait in the study, boss." "No," Damien said, without taking his eyes off Evelyn. "We're done for the night. Get out! Both of you." Carmine didn't need to be told twice. He swept up his coat and practically sprinted for the front door, deeply unnerved by the sight of the ruthless Damien Reed, acting like a domesticated husband. Tommy followed, throwing one last complicated look at Evelyn, a mix of relief that she was back and resentment for the hell she had put his boss through. When the front door shut, leaving the house dead quiet again, Damien wrapped his arm around her waist. He supported her lower back, a massive, warm pressure against her aching spine. "Come to the kitchen," he said softly, guiding her out of the dining room. "I'll make you whatever you want." The kitchen was all stainless steel and dark marble, spotless and cold. Damien sat her down on a cushioned stool at the island. He didn't call for a maid. He walked over to the industrial fridge, pulled out a jug of whole milk, and poured her a glass. He handed it to her, watching intensely as she drank it down in one long gulp. He took the empty glass from her hand and set it on the counter. Then he stepped between her knees, crowding her against the edge of the marble island. He placed both hands on her stomach, his expression completely guarded. "You think you can protect a stranger on a street corner from me?" he asked quietly, picking up the thread of their interrupted argument. "I'm protecting you from yourself," Evelyn said tiredly. She rested her hands over his, feeling the warmth of his skin. "You kill the forgery guy someone notices. It draws attention. You want to keep us safe. Stop acting like a mobster for 5 minutes and start acting like a ghost." Damien stared at her, the dark intensity in his eyes flickering with dark amusement. "You want me to roll over, Evelyn play dead while the sharks circle? I want you alive." She whispered the truth, slipping out before she could lock it down. "I ran because I thought I was going to have to identify your body in a morgue. If you tear this city apart over me, they will come for you. And if they kill you, what the hell am I supposed to do then?" Damien's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, resting his forehead against hers. The silence stretched between them, heavy with years of blood secrets, and a love that was too violent for its own good. "Nobody is killing me," Damien vowed, his lips brushing against hers with every word. "I have too much to lose now. I'll be a ghost. I'll be whatever you need me to be. But you're going to let me take care of you." He kissed her then. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate bruising and deeply possessive, a brand marking his territory, erasing the 8 months they had spent apart. Evelyn meant to push him away. She meant to hold on to her anger. Instead, she knotted her fingers into his shirt and kissed him back, the taste of him breaking down the last of her defenses. Tomorrow the syndicate would demand blood. Tomorrow, the reality of the danger would set in. But tonight, in the quiet dark of the kitchen, she finally stopped running. By day 3, the estate didn't feel like a home. It felt like a high-end fallout shelter. Evelyn stood by the second-story window of the master suite, watching the rain finally clear into a bitter grey Tuesday morning. Below in the driveway, 2 black SUVs were parked horizontally across the wrought-iron gates. Men in heavy winter coats stood in pairs by the perimeter wall. They were smoking their breath, pluming in the freezing air, hands resting explicitly on the grips of rifles slung over their shoulders. The Wi-Fi in the house had been cut. The landlines were unplugged. Damien had taken her cell phone the first morning, dropped it into a glass of bourbon, and then thrown the glass into the fireplace. They tracked the GPS pings, he had said, flatly watching the plastic melt. She was a ghost trapped in a fortress built entirely for her. Evelyn turned away from the window, resting a hand on her lower back. The dull, grinding ache in her pelvis had become a permanent fixture. She walked down the hall intending to ask Mrs. Gable for some ice when she heard the distinct ripping sound of drywall coming from the east wing. She followed the noise. The heavy double doors of the guest room, the one right next to the master suite, were propped open. Inside the room was unrecognizable. The antique mahogany furniture was gone. The heavy drapes had been torn down. 3 men in work clothes were actively tearing up the hardwood floors, replacing them with thick, sound-dampening cork and plush cream-colored carpeting. Damien stood in the center of the chaos. He wore dark jeans and a black Henley, his sleeves pushed up exposing the faded ink of a syndicate oath on his left forearm. He was holding a clipboard, speaking to a nervous-looking contractor in a low, exacting tone. "I don't care if it's imported," Damien was saying, pointing a pen at a schematic. "I said I want ballistic glass on these windows by tomorrow night. If the frame doesn't fit, cut the brick. If you can't cut the brick, I'll find a crew who can." "Mr. Reed, custom ballistic panes take 3 weeks to manufacture." Damien dropped the clipboard onto a stack of drywall. The sharp crack made the contractor flinch. "I am not asking for a favor, Paul. I am telling you what is going to happen. Tomorrow night. Bulletproof glass, or you're out of business in this city." Evelyn leaned against the doorframe. "You're scaring him, Damien." Damien whipped his head around. The lethal, cold-blooded expression vanished the second his eyes landed on her. He waved a hand at the contractor, a silent dismissal, and walked across the room, stepping carefully over scattered nails and debris. "You're supposed to be in bed," he said, reaching out to wrap a hand around her arm, guiding her back into the hallway where the air wasn't thick with dust. "I've been in bed for 3 days. My spine feels like shattered glass," Evelyn muttered, letting him lead her. She looked back into the gutted room. "What are you doing to the guest suite?" "It's not a guest suite anymore. It's a nursery." Evelyn stopped walking. She looked at him, her chest tightening. "A nursery with bulletproof glass. A nursery with environmental air filters, an independent generator line, and a reinforced steel core in the doorframe," Damien corrected without a hint of irony. He looked at her stomach, his dark eyes tracing the prominent curve hidden beneath her maternity sweater. "Aris said you have 6 weeks left. Maybe less. The room will be ready. Damien." Evelyn breathed out a long, shaky sigh. She grabbed his wrist, forcing him to look at her face. "Listen to yourself. You are building a bunker. You are putting our baby in a vault. I am keeping it safe from a world you refuse to leave." She shot back the anger she had swallowed for 3 days, finally rising to the surface. "This is exactly why I ran. You think putting steel in the walls fixes the problem? What happens when the baby needs to go to school? Are you going to send an armored convoy to kindergarten? What happens when we want to take a walk in the park? You can't put bulletproof glass on the sky, Damien." His jaw locked. The muscle beneath his ear ticked a frantic rhythm. He stepped into her space, crowding her against the wall-papered corridor. "I don't have a choice," he said, his voice a harsh, ragged whisper. "I own this city, Evelyn. If I step down, they kill me to make sure I don't come back. If I show weakness, they smell blood in the water. The only way you and this baby survive is if I am the most terrifying thing in the dark. That is the reality." He reached out his calloused palm, flattening against the side of her neck, his thumb resting gently over her racing pulse. "I can't be a normal father." He admitted the words visibly costing him. It was a confession dragged out of him with broken glass. "I can't take the kid to a public park. I can't go to Little League games without 4 men watching the bleachers. But I can promise you this: nobody will ever touch you. Nobody will ever hurt our child. They will have everything they ever want, and they will never know what it means to be afraid. Because I'll carry the fear for them." Evelyn looked into his eyes. There was no lie there. Only a brutal, devastating honesty. He was a monster, yes, but he was her monster. He was tearing the world apart to make a safe corner for his family. A sharp, sudden kick hit her ribs. Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. Damien's hand immediately dropped from her neck to cover hers. He felt the movement. The tight, angry lines of his face softened into something heartbreakingly fragile. "Go back to bed, Evelyn," he murmured, kissing her forehead. His lips lingered against her skin. "Let me build the room, please." She didn't argue this time. She just nodded, letting him walk her back to the master suite. The trap was closed. The concrete was poured. All she could do now was wait for the birth. The illusion of safety shattered exactly 4 hours later. It was 8 in the evening. Dinner had been quiet. Evelyn was sitting in the overstuffed armchair by the fireplace in the study, trying to read a paperback while Damien worked at his desk. He was signing off on legitimate shipping manifests, his glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, looking more like a tired accountant than a syndicate boss. The heavy mahogany doors flew open. Tommy didn't knock. He stepped into the room, his face stripped of its usual stoic color. He looked sick. Damien was out of his chair before Tommy even opened his mouth, his hand dropping instinctively toward the drawer where he kept his Glock. "What is it?" Tommy didn't say a word. He walked to the desk and tossed a manila envelope onto the polished wood. Evelyn froze. She knew that envelope. It was the same one she had brought to the estate 3 days ago, the one containing the divorce papers, the one Damien had ripped in half and thrown on the floor. Mrs. Gable threw the torn papers in the trash in the kitchen. Tommy said, his voice dangerously low, "The trash gets taken to the dumpster out back. One of our guys found this taped to the windshield of the perimeter patrol vehicle 10 minutes ago." Damien didn't touch it. He just stared at the crumpled, taped-together envelope. "Open it," Damien ordered. Tommy reached into the envelope and pulled out a single photograph. He slid it across the desk. Evelyn pushed herself out of the armchair. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a cold, oily sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. She waddled over to the desk standing beside Damien. It was a picture of her, taken from a high angle, maybe a tree branch or the roof of a neighboring estate. It showed Evelyn standing at the wrought iron gates 3 days ago, wearing her black coat, her massive, pregnant stomach undeniably visible in profile as she handed the envelope to the guard. Written on the bottom of the photo in thick black marker were 4 words: "Beautiful wife, healthy baby." The silence in the study was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a detonation. Damien's hands were flat on the desk. His knuckles were bone white. The veins in his forearms stood out like steel cords under his skin. "Who?" Damien whispered. It was a terrifying sound. "The Kavanagh crew," Tommy answered grimly. "We checked the security footage from the street cameras down the hill. A grey sedan was parked 2 blocks away when Evelyn's cab pulled up. Plates match a rental leased to a Kavanagh enforcer." The Kavanaghs, an Irish syndicate operating out of South Boston. They had been quiet for months, slowly picking up the scraps left behind after Damien decimated the O'Connors. "They know," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. The room tilted dangerously. The fear she had outrun in Chicago had finally caught up to her, crashing through the bulletproof glass Damien was trying to build. "Damien, they know I'm back. They know about the baby." Damien didn't look at her. He pulled open the desk drawer. He took out the heavy black Glock, racked the slide with a sharp metallic clack, and shoved it into the holster under his arm. He looked at Tommy. "Call Carmine. Tell him to get the strike teams ready. Every man we have on the payroll. We're hitting the Kavanaugh docks tonight. Then we hit their clubs. We don't stop until their entire leadership structure is bleeding out on the pavement." "Damien, no." Evelyn grabbed his arm. "You can't leave the house. If this is a trap—" "It's not a trap, it's a threat," Damien snarled, pulling away from her grip. His eyes were entirely black, empty of anything human. He was the boss now. "They took a picture of you. They looked at my wife. They looked at my unborn child, and they put a target on your backs. I'm going to erase their bloodline from this city." He grabbed his dark wool coat from the back of his chair and shrugged it on. "You are staying here," he told her, finally meeting her eyes. "Tommy is staying with you. 10 men in the house, 20 on the grounds. Nobody gets in. If you hear shooting, you go to the basement panic room and you lock the steel door. You don't open it for anyone but me." "Damien, please." Evelyn begged, tears finally spilling over her lashes. The hormone-fueled panic was suffocating. "Don't go. What if they kill you? I can't raise this baby alone. Don't leave me." He stopped at the door. He turned back, crossing the room in 2 strides. He framed her face in his hands, kissing her hard, tasting the salt of her tears. "I'm not leaving you," he swore against her mouth. "I'm securing our future. I told you I'd carry the fear for you. Tonight I give it back to them." He let her go, turned and walked out the door. Tommy stayed behind, pulling his own weapon, his eyes scanning the windows. Evelyn stood alone by the desk, looking down at the photograph. The baby kicked violently against her ribs, reacting to the massive spike of adrenaline in her blood. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, entirely trapped in the gilded cage, listening to the sound of armored SUVs roaring down the driveway to start a war. The grandfather clock in the foyer struck midnight. The sound echoed through the empty, cavernous house like a judge's gavel. Evelyn paced the length of the study. Her socks slipped slightly on the Persian rug. Every time she reached the heavy desk, a tight, seizing cramp wrapped around her lower back, forcing her to stop and grip the mahogany edge until it passed. She blamed the stress. She blamed the adrenaline. Tommy stood by the window, peering through a crack in the heavy velvet drapes. The radio, clipped to his belt, hissed with static, offering nothing but silence from the strike teams downtown. "Call him," Evelyn said. Her voice was thin, strained. She pressed the heel of her hand into her spine. "Tommy, call him. It's been 4 hours. Radio silence during a raid. Evelyn." Tommy replied, not looking back. His hand was resting on the grip of his pistol. "He'll call when the Kavanaughs are in body bags." Another cramp hit her. This one didn't feel like a dull ache. It felt like a hot iron rod sliding through her pelvis. Evelyn gasped, her knees buckling. She caught herself on the edge of the leather chair, breathing in short, harsh pants. "Tommy!" she wheezed. He finally turned. His eyes widened. He crossed the room in 3 strides, catching her by the elbow before she hit the floor. Hey, look at me. Are you hurt?" "I think." Evelyn swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out across her collarbones. "I think I'm in labor." Tommy stared at her, the color draining from his face. "You're 34 weeks. Aris said you had a month." "Tell that to the baby." She groaned, clutching his forearm. Before Tommy could reach for his radio to call for the estate doctor, a sound shattered the quiet of the night. It wasn't a gunshot. It was a deep, concussive boom that rattled the glass in the window frames and sent a shock wave through the floorboards. The front gates. Tommy's radio exploded into life. Screams, gunfire, the chaotic, terrified voice of the perimeter guards. They breached the wall. 3 trucks they rammed the south perimeter. We have heavy casualties. They're pushing toward the house. Tommy dropped his hand from Evelyn's arm. The realization hit him raw and devastating. It was a diversion, he whispered, staring at the door. The photograph. It was a bait to get Damien out of the house with the heavy muscle. Another explosion closer this time. The sound of automatic weapons erupted in the driveway, a deafening continuous roar that tore through the quiet estate. "Move!" Tommy barked. He grabbed Evelyn by the shoulders, hauling her upright. "We're going to the basement, now." Evelyn took a step, and a sudden warm rush of fluid soaked through her sweatpants, pooling on the expensive rug. Her water broke. The sheer terror of the moment mixed violently with the biological imperative tearing through her body. "I can't run!" she sobbed, panic, finally clawing up her throat. "You don't have a choice!" Tommy roared over the sound of shattering glass as the front windows of the house gave way to a hail of bullets. He didn't wait for her to walk. He threw his left arm around her waist, practically carrying her weight, and dragged her out of the study. The hallway was a war zone. Drywall dust rained from the ceiling like dirty snow. The chandelier in the foyer had been shot down, lying in a heap of shattered crystal. 2 of Damien's guards were crouched behind a marble pillar, firing blindly through the ruined front doors. "Covering fire!" Tommy yelled. He shoved Evelyn toward the kitchen corridor. The kitchen led to the pantry, and the pantry hid the reinforced steel door to the panic room. A bullet clipped the plaster mere inches from Evelyn's head, showering her hair in white dust. She screamed, covering her ears, her massive belly, throwing her off balance as Tommy dragged her forward. The smell of cordite and copper filled her nose. Blood. Someone was bleeding out on the hardwood behind them. They reached the pantry. Tommy shoved the shelving unit aside, revealing the heavy biometric scanner and the thick steel vault door. He slammed his hand onto the pad. The light flashed green. Heavy hydraulic locks disengaged with a mechanical groan. "Get in," Tommy ordered, pushing her through the threshold. Evelyn stumbled into the cold, fluorescent-lit bunker, her hands instinctively wrapping around her stomach. She turned around. Tommy wasn't following her in. He was standing in the doorway, his gun raised toward the kitchen, watching the corridor. "Tommy, what are you doing? Get inside. If I lock this door from the inside, they'll bring breaching charges and blow it open," Tommy said flatly. His eyes were dead resigned to his duty. "I have to hold the choke point. Lock the door, Evelyn. Do not open it for anyone but Damien." "Tommy, no." He hit the external release. The heavy steel door swung shut. The last thing Evelyn saw before the vault sealed was a Kavanaugh enforcer rounding the corner of the kitchen, raising a shotgun. Then the door clicked shut. The heavy bolts slid into place. The roaring chaos of the gunfight was instantly severed, replaced by the suffocating humming silence of the panic room. Evelyn fell to her knees on the cold concrete floor, letting out a guttural, agonizing scream as another contraction ripped through her body, tearing her in half in the lonely dark. The panic room was stocked for a siege, not a delivery. There were crates of rations and armory wall, holding enough firepower to supply a small militia and a military cot shoved into the corner. Evelyn was lying on it. Her sweatpants were discarded on the floor. She was drowning in pain, entirely consumed by the blinding, relentless waves of contractions that were coming 2 minutes apart. She gripped the metal frame of the cot until her knuckles bled. There was no doctor. There was no epidural. There was just the cold, sterile light of the bunker and the terrifying realization that her baby was coming early and entirely unforgiving. She stared at the steel door. She had been locked in here for 40 minutes. 40 minutes of total isolation. She didn't know if Tommy was dead. She didn't know if the Kavanaghs were drilling through the steel right now. She didn't know if Damien was ever coming back. "Ah!" Evelyn screamed, throwing her head back against the thin mattress as her body bore down. Suddenly, a heavy metallic thud echoed from the vault door. Evelyn froze, gasping for air. Another thud. Then the sound of a fist hammering against the steel, frantic and violent. Evelyn opened the door. It was muffled, distorted by the thick metal, but she knew that voice. It was the voice that had haunted her for 8 months in Chicago. She tried to stand, but her legs refused to hold her weight. She dragged herself off the cot, crawling across the cold concrete floor, her breath coming in ragged, animalistic hitches. She reached up to the control panel beside the door. Her bloody, shaking fingers fumbled with the manual override. She pulled the lever. The hydraulic locks hissed. The heavy door swung outward. Damien Reed fell into the room. He was unrecognizable. His bespoke suit was torn to shreds, soaked through with blood, most of it not his own. His face was smeared with ash and grease, his knuckles split open and bleeding freely. He looked wild. He looked like the monster she had run from. But when his dark, feral eyes landed on Evelyn, shivering and half-naked on the concrete floor, the monster vanished. He dropped his gun. It clattered uselessly against the wall. "Evelyn," he choked out, dropping to his knees and sliding across the floor to catch her before she collapsed. "They were here," she sobbed, burying her face into his ruined chest, not caring about the blood or the dirt. Tommy. Tommy stayed outside. Tommy's alive. He took a bullet to the shoulder, but he held the hall. The Kavanaghs are dead. All of them. Damien's hands were shaking violently as he touched her face, her hair checking her for wounds. "I'm so sorry. I should have never left you. I'm so fucking sorry." Evelyn gripped his lapels, her nails digging into the ruined fabric. "Damien, the baby. It's coming. It's coming right now." Damien's eyes widened, dropping to the pool of fluid and blood on the floor. Panic, genuine, absolute panic, seized the Mafia Boss. He looked around the sterile room, searching for a doctor who wasn't there. "Aris is 10 minutes out," Damien stammered, pulling her up and carrying her back to the cot. "Just hold on. Just breathe." "I can't wait." Evelyn screamed her back, arching off the mattress, as the final undeniable urge to push hijacked her nervous system. "It's here." Damien didn't hesitate. The man who had spent the last 5 hours executing his enemies on the docks stripped off his ruined suit jacket. He tossed it aside, rolled up his blood-soaked sleeves, and positioned himself at the foot of the cot. "Okay," Damien said. His voice dropped the panic. It became a steady, heavy anchor in the room. He grabbed her knees, supporting her legs. "I'm right here. Look at me, Evelyn. Only me." She opened her eyes, locking onto his. Through the pain, through the absolute terror of the night, he was the only thing in focus. "Push," he ordered softly. Evelyn pushed. The pain was apocalyptic. It felt like her bones were snapping, tearing her completely apart to make room for the life demanding to be born into this violent world. She screamed his name, her fingers crushing the metal frame of the bed. "You're doing it," Damien said, his voice, cracking tears, finally tracking through the dirt on his face. "I have you. I have you. One more. One more for me, Evelyn." She gave it everything she had left. She pushed until black spots danced in her vision, until all the breath left her lungs in a long, ragged cry. And then a new sound pierced the silence of the bunker. A high, thin wail. Evelyn collapsed back onto the mattress, her chest heaving, sobbing uncontrollably. Damien sat back on his heels. He was holding a tiny red screaming infant in his massive calloused hands. He stared at the child, completely paralyzed by the sheer weight of the moment. "A girl," Damien whispered, his voice completely broken. "Evelyn. It's a girl." He moved with painstaking gentleness, clearing the baby's mouth, wrapping her tightly in a clean undershirt he pulled from one of the survival crates. He stood up and laid the screaming, fragile bundle onto Evelyn's chest. Evelyn wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling the warm weight against her heart. The baby was tiny, but her cry was strong, furious at the world she had been thrust into. Evelyn pressed her lips to the damp, dark hair on the baby's head, weeping into the quiet room. Damien sat on the edge of the cot. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against Evelyn's shoulder, his large hand covering the tiny, shifting form of his daughter. The three of them sat in the underground bunker, surrounded by concrete and steel safe, while the estate burned above them. "I'm never leaving," Evelyn whispered into the dark room. It wasn't a surrender. It was an acceptance. She looked at the man who had torn the city apart to keep them breathing. "But if you ever let the war touch her again, I will kill you myself." Damien lifted his head. He looked at his wife, fierce and beautiful, holding his heir in the ruins of the life he built. "I know," Damien swore, leaning in to kiss her bruised, exhausted lips. "You won't have to. What a journey." From a desperate escape to a birth forged in the middle of a syndicate war, Evelyn and Damien's story proves that the deepest love is often the most dangerous. Will Damien truly be able to keep the violence away from his new daughter, or is peace just an illusion in the mafia underworld? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this deeply emotional mafia romance, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more intense, grounded storytelling. See you next time.